Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition here of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Thursday to you all. We have another great show for you ahead, starting off actually in the world of college football. Got to preview some big games in Week 12 of the college football season. A lot of CFP hopes could be dashed or uplifted in many games across college football, so we got to preview that. We'll be looking at some more general Week 11 prop bets. Yesterday we looked at some Thursday Night Football prop bets. Should be a good one tonight in the NFC East. And now we're looking ahead to Sunday slate. I'm going to update you on some injuries. A little bit more of a positive bent in this segment today rather than the past couple of weeks. More about some players' potential returns for the season. Then I'm making my picks, my all-important picks for some of the biggest games of the weekend in the NFL. And last but not least, going to do a little bit of an early Sunday Night Football betting preview. A very weird game in the AFC between the Bengals and Chargers. But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you that if you want more content such as this or want to look at more exclusive short content, please make yourselves available to the ways to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, not just on YouTube, but around all our social media platforms, TikTok, things of that nature, our website especially. But if you do want to interact with the show more directly, then the best ways to do so will be through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way, like I said, to contribute and interact. You can do three things. You can either click that $ in your chat box in the comment section, leave a tip or donation, go to gsmcpodcast.net as well for any tips or donations if you feel like doing that, or you can just leave any questions, comments, or concerns you have throughout the show, and I will be able to read them out loud on air. I love getting your opinions out there. Just makes the show that much better. But without further ado, let us jump into the first segment of today's show. Actually stick here with our graphics, and let's talk about the week in college football. Week 12. A lot of pivotal games. Not necessarily big CFP elimination games this week, but there is one in particular that we absolutely have to touch upon. And then some minor games. Maybe just for pride for certain teams in terms of the importance of these games, but they're still fun matchups to analyze and diagnose from a betting perspective. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first game, the most important game of the ones I'm going to be talking about. Tennessee going into Athens, Sanford Stadium to take on Georgia. I should have checked that graphic here because we do have some line movement. UJ is not 8.5-point favorites anymore. They are in fact 10-point favorites. And that's perhaps due to the status of Tennessee QB Nico Iamaleava. And I feel that if he does play in this game, I certainly feel like Tennessee's going to stick to the identity they've assumed with him. That he just needs to be efficient enough so that this all-world defense can go to town on Carson Beck and that Georgia offensive line, which looks like it might just be the worst unit in this game. Out of all the units on the field, I'm most concerned, funnily enough, about that Georgia offense. The Tennessee offense, I kind of know what it is. It is very limited in nature, but they don't necessarily have to overcompensate for the lack of defensive prowess because their defense might just be the best in the SEC and in the country. So I'm not necessarily worried if Tennessee doesn't put up enough points. What I'm worried about is Carson Beck continuing this terrible form. 11 interceptions in 12 games, not where he wants to be. And even though this game is at home, this is perhaps the best defense he's faced, and he's going to be harassed all night if that O-line continues to underperform. So I don't necessarily see Georgia winning with this spread this high, but I do see them potentially winning a close one. That being said, I'm not underestimating Tennessee in this one because as much as I want to think Georgia is going to come into this game prepared, much like they were coming off that bye against Texas on the road, I just don't see a path where this offense looks like an offense that can compete against the SEC's best. And Tennessee might just be the best team in the SEC, and they have a chance to go in and prove it in Athens. But that being said, I can't ignore the fact that Georgia has in the past been ready for games of this magnitude. So I do expect them to win this one, but I think that Tennessee will cover the spread. In fact, the over-under actually lowered a little bit to 47.5. So I think that spread is manageable. If Tennessee can generate enough drives where Nico is staying ahead of the sticks and moving the football efficiently without turning the ball over, then I think that there are points to be scored. Georgia's defense is a tough defense, but they have had their weaknesses, and I think you can attack that secondary a little bit. So look for opportunities to avail themselves to Tennessee in this game. And the second game I want to talk about, a little bit on the minor side of things when it comes to CFP stakes, but it could be a determining factor still in this weird ACC race. Clemson taking on Pitt in Pittsburgh. Not necessarily a must-win for Pitt because they are all but eliminated, both from the ACC and CFP picture, but this feels like a must-win for Clemson. Going into Pittsburgh now as 12.5-point favorites, not 10.5-point favorites anymore. I'm sorry, the lines have kind of fluctuated as the week has gone along, and I did make this graphic many days ago. The over-under, though, still at 55.5. And I think that this game will come down to the play and efficiency of Pitt's offense, because this offensive line has not necessarily looked like it did at the start of the season, protecting Eli Holstein, who, while has certainly been a revelation for the Panthers, isn't necessarily someone who plays well under pressure, I believe. They kind of got battered by SMU. Their offensive line struggles were revealed last week against Virginia, and now they're facing a Clemson defense that is highly opportunistic and can tear you down if you don't bring your A game. And so I feel like this is more of a trap game for Clemson should both units for Pittsburgh get on track. That's why I'm looking at a key player like Desmond Reed for Pittsburgh to kind of set the tempo in the run game for them, whereas Clemson, I kind of feel like, can expect more efficiency from both Cade Klubnik and Phil Maffa in their offense, and on the defensive side of the football, just play a Clemson brand of football in that regard. And so that's why I feel like, in terms of my prediction for this game, I'm comfortable with taking the points on Clemson here, even though it's a lot of points in a road game after, a tough stretch for Clemson, kind of getting exposed by Louisville and wondering if winning out will be enough to make the ACC championship, but you got to take care of what's in front of you right now. And maybe along the way, dominoes will fall. Maybe SMU somehow loses a game. Maybe Miami loses another. And you find yourselves with an opportunity in the ACC championship game. But just take care of business in Pittsburgh. And from here on out, it's just win and hope. And that's all that Clemson can do right now. So that's what I'm going to take right here. Clemson on the road against Pittsburgh. The third game I want to talk about, kind of more of a fun one with a little bit of low stakes. Mainly a point of pride for both teams here. Playing for pride, rather. South Carolina going to Missouri. Actually staying at home against Missouri. This one is one of those games where it's not going to have any importance to the playoff picture, but it's certainly a point of importance for these kind of middle tier SEC teams. And Mizzou, not for nothing, still only has 2 losses, but they are very detrimental in terms of trying to climb back into the rankings and the reckoning for the playoff picture, because they got blown out by Alabama. And I forget who their initial loss was to, but I do believe it might have been an unranked team at the time. And now they're going into South Carolina to face a team that really could have been in the playoff picture themselves. Close loss to Alabama, close loss in week 1, mind you, against LSU. An upset victory over Texas A&M on the road, and actually I believe that's at home too. I'm getting a little mixed up talking about these underrated SEC teams here. But what I mean in terms of point of pride game, it's also going to, I believe, open up the betting market a little bit more, because both of these teams are going to bring their A game in this one, not just because, they're fighting for a playoff spot, but because, they felt hard done by the progressions of the season. And so that's why this game is so important to them. Mizzou, 14-point favorites, a little bit of an iffy quarterback situation there. Potentially Drew Pine will have to start this game. Whereas South Carolina, Lenora Sellers has been one of the most enigmatic SEC quarterbacks in the country. And Raheem Sanders is just a monster, one of the most underrated players in the country as well. So I'm actually going to take South Carolina against the spread at home here. I think that Mizzou is a little bit banged up, and South Carolina is just riding a wave of momentum, coming off another great road win against Vandy. And so they'll be looking fresh for this one at home against Mizzou. Then the last game I want to talk about a little bit briefly, not the most exciting game of the bunch I picked, but LSU Florida could be intriguing for LSU's bounce back performance. I feel like against Alabama, they got caught off guard at home, and it wasn't necessarily the best game for them. Nussmeier looked mortal. The receiving core couldn't get going, and Alabama just dominated through the play of Jalen Milroe. With this game, they're going to have a lot more discrepancies between both of them and Florida in terms of talent. While I do like Florida's defense a lot, it's not that potent. It just got absolutely battered by Texas. And this offense being led by Aiden Warner now does not necessarily appeal to me. So look for LSU to bounce back. And I don't necessarily like that this spread lowered a little bit to -4 for LSU on the road. I think that, there may be rumors that DJ Lagway will come back and play in this one. But even if he does, I think he'll be a little bit too limited to go up against a team like LSU coming off that painful loss. So look for LSU to go into Gainesville and perform well in a get-right game, kind of much like what Texas did a little bit when they got shell-shocked by Georgia. They played a little bit sluggishly against Vandy and then had the bye, and then at home against Florida had their best performance of the season. So look for that to be similar to LSU. So I'm taking them. So to summate my picks, I'm taking Tennessee to cover the spread, Clemson to win outright on the road, South Carolina to cover the spread at home, and LSU on the road to win outright. Let me know what you think in the comments, because coming up next we transition to the NFL, looking at some more general prop bets for the week. Sunday's slate is looking very interesting, so you definitely don't want to miss this segment right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the...
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to interact with the show a little bit more directly, the best way to do it is through our Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, and also our website, GSMC Podcast.net. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. Love reading your comments on air, hearing your opinions in conjunction with mine. This makes the show that much better. But without further ado, let us jump into our second segment of the day here on the show, talking some general Week 11 prop bets. A lot of interesting games, interesting storylines to cover here for certain players. We're getting into more divisional matchups here, more conference rivalries, so to speak, as well as we get deeper into the season. And so expect my prop bet segments to get a lot more chock full of different players and how they're starting to react to certain situations. We're going to be talking about a lot of different teams, potentially teams battling for a playoff spot, potentially teams wanting to cement them. So this segment is going to be one of the more diverse ones over the next couple of weeks, and I'm excited to start in Week 11 where we're going to see a lot of different things come to fruition. So let's start off with one of those conference rivalries being renewed, one of the more popular regular season matchups between these two teams, Chiefs, Bills. Let's talk about Josh Allen in this one. I feel like, being 3-0 against the Chiefs in the regular season really kind of speaks to Josh Allen as a quarterback. We're not going to talk about his playoff performance with the Chiefs, but I do feel like when Josh Allen in this environment where he's not necessarily playing for huge stakes and he's playing as well as he has this season, he's going to be as relaxed and poised as he's ever been in a game against the Chiefs in this one. So that's why I'm going to take the under on his interception total. It's a little bit of a weird prop bet, 0.5 interceptions and minus 137 to hit for you, but I do feel like he's playing the best football. Granted, he did have 2 picks last week against Indy, but in this one, it feels a little different. This, out of all the games for the Chiefs, is the only one where they're technically projected to lose. So that means that we're looking at a 16-1 season for the Chiefs. So I was actually reading about how the Chiefs could perform the rest of the season on ESPN. It's a very interesting article breaking down their schedule strength and things of that nature. But this is with a game that a lot of pundits pinpointed for the kind of trap game for the Chiefs. So look for Josh Allen to continue to perform well against the Chiefs in the regular season. And I think that it's going to come down to how people think and realize what this Chiefs defense really is. Because think about it. They are generally good defense, but they're kind of overshadowed by certain things that are happening in these games. Like lucky situations. Like in the first game of the season, Isaiah Likely's toe being out of bounds. And I think that their schedule really isn't indicative of a team that would struggle defensively. So this will be the first game where an offense can truly test them and sustain drives. And so if Josh Allen is as efficient as I think he will be, look for this to be the game where the Chiefs finally fall flat. So that's why I think Josh Allen's going to hit the under in a little bit of a weird situation here in terms of prop betting, 0.5 interceptions. Now let's talk about a receiver here who has been kind of topsy-turvy, a reception monster, not necessarily putting up the yardage like he did last year in his first All-Pro season in the league. But against, I believe, the Colts, it's going to be an interesting situation for actually the Jaguars. So another interesting situation here for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I'm giving a lot of respect here to this Jaguars defense, especially that secondary, was really stepped up. They held Justin Jefferson without a touchdown last week. And I feel like the Lions are starting to show a little bit of their vulnerability on the offensive side of the football. I think that in terms of one thing that stuck out to me in the Texans game was that patience kind of overwhelmed them from the Texans secondary and defense in general. I feel like the Texans were willing to be comfortable in zone coverage and limit the space that Amon-Ra St. Brown was able to get into, and of course they made the necessary adjustments at halftime. But I feel like, the Jaguars are a team that, against these kind of opponents, can generally slow them down. So look for Amon-Ra St. Brown to potentially disappoint again. Under 65.5 receiving yards is my prop bet for him at minus 137. And it's no indictment of what his talent means to this team. It's just that I feel like there are ways where you can slow them down if you're patient on the defensive side of the football, especially on the back end. The Jaguars have proven that by no means are they a finished product of an elite NFL secondary. In fact, they're more like the exoskeleton of one. But they can slow teams down enough to make it look like the Jaguars could have been an even better team. And yet, with all their foibles on the offensive side of the football, their foibles in coaching, they really haven't proven that they can win a game like this. And I don't think they will this one. But consider the fact that they can do certain things that frustrate teams. And one of them is stopping and limiting the pass game and your receivers, respectively. So look for Amon-Ra St. Brown to have a pretty uncomfortable day against Jacksonville. Now let's transition to a running back here who we all know is one of everyone's favorites to bet on and one of everyone's favorite players to watch in general in the National Football League, and that is Derrick Henry, an important AFC North showdown here. I feel like, I could sit here and say this will finally be the game where Derrick Henry gets shut down because of his age, and it will get to him, and it'll show his decline, like I thought before the season when he made this move to Baltimore. But I don't think he ever will, because this Baltimore offense always stays ahead of schedule. Lamar keeps everything intact. He can perform out of structure. He knows when Derrick Henry is primed and ready to go and smells blood. And so this team will look like a well-oiled machine against Pittsburgh. I did say the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is going to be perhaps the best one in terms of slowing it down because they faced Lamar countless times and know what to expect. But I think that opens up more avenues for Derrick Henry to wear down that front seven and thus open up more avenues in the passing game for Lamar. So I'm going to take the over here easily for Derrick Henry, 85.5 and minus 137 as well. So look for him to continue his solid production, even if Lamar Jackson runs into some roadblocks in this game. And so that's why I feel like, even though I'm respecting the Steelers' defense in this one, it's still going to be a game where Derrick Henry is going to dominate. And then for my fourth prop bet, let's talk about DK Metcalf here, because this is a divisional game of high importance to Seattle. They want to stay within touching distance of the top of the NFC West, stay in the playoff picture, and in order to do it, DK Metcalf needs to come back healthy for one, from that MCL sprain he suffered before the bye, and with a vengeance. Because if all three of these Seattle receivers are playing at a high level, much like they did sans DK Metcalf in that game against LA, then this unit's one to look out for in the second half of the season. And DK Metcalf's going to be the X factor. If Tyler Lockett and JSN can maintain what they've done without him, then adding him will only make this wide receiver core better. And in my opinion, in this tough stretch of games where they have a lot of divisional opponents to face, the 49ers, Cardinals, and Cardinals again in the span of 4 weeks, I feel like DK is going to have a lot of opportunities to prove himself in this team. So, in the first divisional game back from the bye, after his injury, expect him to hit the over here. 65.5 receiving yards at minus 137, because the key to winning games for Seattle is in the pass game. They have to predicate themselves in the pass, because I really don't think this offensive line is talented enough at all to support a solid running game, no matter how good of a running back Kenneth Walker is. And so expect to see a lot of passing situations for Seattle, and expect for DK Metcalf to be the one guy to bail them out more often than not. So that's why I feel like DK Metcalf's importance in these next 4 weeks or so, and even in the closing stages of the season where they play teams like the Packers and Rams again, and really tough offenses to keep up with, that's where you're going to need DK Metcalf to really step up and say, I'm going to take over for this team to get us to the promised land. And so that's why I'm thinking so highly of DK Metcalf, even though there's going to be a lot of skepticism, a lot of apprehension surrounding him after this injury. And then the last kind of prop bet I want to talk about here before we head to break lies with perhaps the best quarterback play in the AFC, if not the entire NFL, over the past couple of weeks. Let's talk about Joe Burrow here. I feel like, this is finally going to be the game where Joe Burrow is a little bit more mortal than we've seen him in these past couple of weeks because of the prowess of the Chargers defense. But I'm still scared to mention this prop because of what Joe Burrow has done over these past couple of weeks. Like I said, he's playing MVP caliber ball. His connection with the receivers is the best it's been. And the Chargers are kind of paper tigers in my opinion, and they really haven't played an offense that can challenge them like the Bengals offense. However, I'm going to stick with this bet in saying that Joe Burrow will hit the under at 265.5 passing yards at minus 137, but I still do not feel comfortable with it because I'm more reliant on the Bengals offense continuing to strut their stuff than this Chargers defense continuing to play top 5 scoring defense level football on that side of the football. So this bet could come back to haunt me, but I think I'm going to stick with it just because I have to give the Chargers the benefit of the doubt here. But let me know what you think about all my prop bets for this week. Very interesting week, like I said, in terms of storylines around the league and how you might want to bet. But coming up after this short break, a little bit more of a positive injury update segment here. A couple of returns we're going to talk about for some potential players this week. We're going to be right back after that short break to see how it also affects you on the fantasy side of things.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of the day here on the show, like I mentioned before the break, we're going to be heading into our injury updates / fantasy implications segment. Talking about some key injuries that occurred recently and how they might affect your team going forward in these coming weeks. And I feel like for the first time in quite some time, I'm not necessarily mentioning many new injuries here. Yes, there were a couple lingering ones that have occurred over the past couple of weeks, in weeks 9 through 10 specifically, but I'm going to be having a more positive bent with this one because of all potential injury returns we're going to have. Like I said, a lot of teams are coming back from the buys and thus allowing for more players to get healthy, like the one we're going to talk about at the start of this segment, but also just more optimistic outlooks over these past couple of weeks in terms of the health of certain players. We've seen a little bit of decline since, the middle of the season to now, where we're seeing a lot less injuries occur and more players return from them rather than head to the IR. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about these injuries, but also update you on some ones that could be lingering or reoccurring. Let's start off with some of the returns, though. Let's start off with one of the most important ones for the Bucs here in Mike Evans. He broke his leg, obviously, a couple weeks back, But now he's looking like he's going to be returning to the Bucs after their bye week, and it's going to be for a very important stretch of their season, because after this bye week they may just have the toughest schedule in the NFL. We're just going to pull it up here to go over it because it is a gauntlet here. They do have some easy games right after their bye. The Giants, Panthers, and Raiders, all winnable games. They play the Chargers, Cowboys, and Panthers. So actually, they do have one of the more easy schedules, mind you. I was more concerned about the results beforehand, perhaps. The fact that they weren't able to win any of those big games against teams like the Ravens and the Chiefs. But in this easier schedule, expect, the return of Mike Evans potentially bolster this team, because for what it's worth, they were playing really physical, tough football without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin anyways. So I feel like their backs are up against it in the NFC South, but if, NFC North teams start to decline, the NFC West becomes more of a logjam, if Seattle's able to stick around these next couple of weeks, then, there's a chance for the Bucs to make a little bit of a run here and sneak into the playoffs as a wild card. And potentially, with how shaky the Falcons look, they might be able to win the NFC South despite not winning the head-to-head tiebreaker against them. So this is one of the more positive injury updates I can give you right now, and also in terms of fantasy implications, because I feel like, it might be to the detriment of people who bought into the Cade Otton, Jalen McMillan hype, but it also opens up, this avenue of, okay, the Bucs now know what they are without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, so potentially some of these players who got a lot more interest in them and a lot more targets this time around might continue to do so, because only Mike Evans is coming back, right? Not Chris Godwin for the rest of the season. So guys like Cade Otton and Jalen McMillan and Bucky Irving will still be valuable, I believe, from a fantasy perspective. So that's a really positive sign that an upward trajectory is coming for the Bucs and for your fantasy team, perhaps. Now let's talk about Nico Collins, who could have been back a bit sooner than expected. It turned out to be a game-time decision in the game against the Lions, and boy, could they have needed them there. Because had they held on in that game, that's perhaps the most impressive win this season by any team, really. And I feel like, the decision to sit him out for that game was essentially a good one, because they might want him for more of a stretch run here. They have the division wrapped up, and they didn't want to risk, in a pretty physical game, Nico Collins re-aggravating that injury, so it was a smart move. But, that win could have really bolstered the case for them to be a sneaky Super Bowl contender, Houston. I still regard them very highly in the AFC. They might just be the second or third best team in the AFC when all is said and done. But I think that in that game, you might have wanted a Nico Collins to push you over the edge. He could have been the difference in that one. But I feel like, they have the bye. They can nurse him back to health. And he's going to come back. And potentially, the Texans can go on a heater here. I'm not familiar with their schedule as much as I am with the Bucs in terms of easiness. But I'll be able to pull it up here and tell you more about it. After this short hiatus here, they're going to place the Cowboys, Titans, and Jags. So that's an easy schedule. The Dolphins, Chiefs, and Ravens remain, though, for them towards the end of the season. So that could be a tough gauntlet. And you're going to want Nico Collins to stay healthy for that stretch. So kind of sacrificing what could have been a pretty important game in terms of setting the bar in the AFC in terms of respectable wins for that stretch run at the end that includes divisional conference opponents, I feel like the Texans played it smart here. But, it would have been fun to see if he could have been the difference maker for the Texans in that one. But let's hope for a speedy recovery for him and hope that we see him on the field come this Sunday, helping the Texans achieve their goals for this season. Now let's get into a little bit more of the bad news on the injury front that everyone kind of saw coming. Dak Prescott. the season-ending surgery for him after that knee injury he suffered a couple weeks ago. And for what it's worth, I feel like it could have been a lot worse for the Cowboys in terms of, how the organization handled it. But they feel very candid about where this injury stands with them. A lot of positive news and signs coming out of Cowboys camp about Dak's recovery. And so I feel like if this were an injury where a lot of the news coming back to the average fan was very negative, and Jerry Jones created more of a tense situation, intense culture after the season they've been having, then all bets will be off for this team. I think the rails would completely fall off, and there would be no hope. But now there's optimism. I think that this team can play a little more loosely, especially because potentially Dak was part of the problem in terms of how him and CD had to perform at a high standard because of their ties to their contracts and what that meant for them. So I think this alleviates some of the burden now. I think that the Cowboys, as funny as it is to say, no matter who's at the helm for them at the quarterback position, Cooper Rush or Trey Lance, I feel like there's going to start to be a little bit more anxiety-free football coming from the Cowboys. And so it may not change much of the trajectory of their season, but it certainly is something to take away, a silver lining to hold on to for the Cowboys and their fans. But I hope that Dak recovers speedily and healthily and returns and is in better mindset than he perhaps was this season. Now let's talk a little bit more about the recent injury, because there are several that could be concerning. So let's start off with perhaps the least concerning and then move up a little bit here. Dalton Kincaid, his knee injury during that game against the Colts was a little bit concerning. I believe he did return to play early in the third quarter, kind of was in and out of the game. That's always something to monitor with a guy like Dalton Kincaid, and tight ends in particular, as we're going to find out in this segment. I feel like these younger guys, especially in teams that value them a little bit more than others, might be more injury prone, but they still aren't so injury prone that they'll be out for extended periods of time to where you're going to have to worry in terms of finding contingency plans for them, if you know what I mean. Because I still personally have Dalton Kincaid in my fantasy squad, and whether he's been injured or not, I feel like, the overall balance of my squad can help compensate for injuries to my tight end. Because I'm not saying that the tight ends aren't important, but their volatility is always to be expected. And if you stay ahead of the curve and have faith and trust in your team outside of the position, then chances are you're fine in terms of contingency plans and how to account for them. But it is interesting to see all these younger tight ends especially get injured so often. Which brings me to Sam Laporta's injury, which is more of a day-to-day situation. He could be questionable for this week against the Jags, but again, he's someone I wouldn't necessarily worry about too much like Kincaid, because A, the Lions offense will be just fine without him, and B, it's not like he's going to miss too extended a period of time, and if you do have him on your fantasy team, chances are you have a pretty good fantasy team to compensate for his loss here. But it's interesting to monitor because of, the Lions' run going forward. They're not playing a lot of tough games, so potentially if this injury continues to aggravate him, they might hold him out for a longer period of time and use him for a bit more of a stretch run. But I do think that because of, his versatility in this offense, he won't be out for long, and he'll make a speed return here for the Lions. And then, Trevor Lawrence's injury is a bizarre one, because he is someone who I wouldn't necessarily want getting too banged up, right? Because the Jaguars are playing out the season here, not with any big stakes whatsoever. So, it wouldn't make any sense really to hurry Trevor Lawrence back. They are hoping for a post-bye return, I hear, from the Jags camp. But it's not like, it would be a kind of rejuvenation or reinvigoration to the Jags if he does come back, because they'll still be bad and there'll still be problems with that offense. So I'm not necessarily too concerned about Trevor Lawrence. You shouldn't really be either, because I don't necessarily think many of you have him on your roster, perhaps in a deeper league. So that injury is a little bit humdrum. And then Isaiah Pacheco as well, returning to practice, could be a positive sign for this Chiefs out. But other than that, we know what you think about the injury crisis. Coming up next, though, we're making some big picks in big games this week in the NFL. It should be very exciting. A lot of divisional rivalries, a lot of conference rivalries to talk about. So we'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available every...
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network for our fourth segment of the day. As always, gotta make my picks for Sunday's slate of games. A lot of interesting ones. We're getting into divisional races, conference rivalries that could reignite come playoff time. We're looking at some very, very intense games here, surprising games potentially as well I'm going to be talking about. And so I feel like this is the time where all my picks are for meaningful games. And so, for what it's worth, I might try and keep it diverse, just because a lot of teams, I might have high regards towards despite their play. But now we're starting to get into some really integral matchups here, and not just, games that I feel personally could be enjoyable any given week. We're now in the nitty-gritty, and the games will reflect it. So without further ado, let's jump right into my picks for Week 11. Starting off, though, with perhaps the surprising game of the week, perhaps the only one potentially not with much at stake, maybe more so for the Denver Broncos and the Atlanta Falcons, but I do think that this is going to be a sneaky good game, because both of these teams match up so weirdly in that this Falcons offense can be one of the better ones in the league, but that defense just is so horrifying to watch, and I don't really think it's capable of stopping anyone. Whereas the Denver Broncos, I feel that their offense is more opportunistic, definitely more based on Bo Nix's comfortability rather than, specifically structured plans just yet. They're getting to that point, but I don't necessarily think they're quite ready for a concrete game plan for Bo Nix. So it's a little bit more improvisational than you might think from a Sean Payton offense, whereas the defense has steadily been one of the most surprising units in the league. You may not be able to name anyone on that defense, but they are playing lights-out football. Did have a little bit of a mishap against the Baltimore Ravens, but they did come back and have perhaps one of the most impressive performances by a team against the Chiefs all year on the defensive side of the football. So it's going to be an interesting game, and I think it's going to be a shootout. That being said, I am going to pick the Falcons against the spread because the Broncos are 1.5 point favorites here. I do think that it's deserved, but I think that, the reason why I'm picking the Falcons, even though I speak so highly of the Broncos, is because it's funny, but I think that this Falcons defense could be the X factor here. I feel like if you could get one or two stops against Bo Nix, that could be enough. Because against the Chiefs, right, the problem with them not winning that game and having it come down to that field goal was because Bo Nix in the second half couldn't sustain drives. And so there are ways you can slow down the Broncos offense. It's not a world beater offense. In fact, it's perhaps the weak link of this team. And no matter how much it's improved, I feel like chances are, no matter how bad you are in defense, 1-2 stops could be the difference in this game. So look for a shootout for the Falcons against the spread to either cover or win outright. Because much as I want to respect the Broncos here and pick them to win this game outright, I just can't ignore the fact that that Broncos offense has not necessarily put forth a fully complete performance just yet. They've had fits and spurts there, but they haven't really put it all together. They're getting there, but until they can prove to me that they can play complementary football alongside that defense, that they can't necessarily win games. And the Falcon side of things, you just have to stay consistent on offense and hope that the defense can get you stops, and this pick will be good as gold. But now let's get into some of the divisional matchups here. Some of the nitty-gritty matchups of the week. Starting off with the big one in the AFC North, Ravens-Steelers. Ravens 3-point favorites here. It's going to be a bloodbath of a game. I feel like, like I said, Pittsburgh's defense is perhaps the most well-rounded and most apt to face an offense like the Baltimore Ravens and limit them to being two-dimensional. So I feel like, this is one of those games where it could go either way. I feel like the spread is low enough to say that the Ravens should cover and win outright. But I do think the Steelers are gaining momentum here. I feel like you can't ignore the fact that this offense feels reinvigorated. The acquisition of Mike Williams with the addition of Russell Wilson at the quarterback position. I feel like, this team is primed to get ready for this game. And not for nothing, I respect the Baltimore Ravens, but the Steelers have been one of those teams that just have their number year in, year out in the Lamar Jackson era. And until, they can start to perform at a consistent level against Pittsburgh, this is going to feel like another slog for them in this game. So that's why I picked the Steelers to cover, because I'm not necessarily certain they win, but it's going to be one of those games where they're going to keep it close enough in the final moments to where they could go one direction or the other. And even if they lose, it's not going to be by much. And even if they win, it's not going to be by much. That's how close I think this game is going to be. So the safest bet to me seems to pick the Steelers against the spread, but to cover. Because this Ravens team, as talented as it is mortal. And even though the mortal side of the football lies in the defense, this offense hasn't necessarily been one of the better ones against the Steelers in the AFC North. Yes, they have Derrick Henry now, and he's a different animal. But I think the Steelers just are looking very much like a team that's ready for anything right now. Ready for the challenge, ready for the burdens that come with winning games unexpectedly, being a surprise team. And Mike Tomlin is perhaps one of the best leaders to lead that charge in the NFL. So these Steelers are going to be no pushovers in this one, and that's why I got to give them the respect they deserve in terms of my prediction. Now let's get into the conference matchup that everyone wants to see. Marquee football here. Whatever you're doing during the afternoon, or, in Central Time in the early stages of the morning, tune into Chiefs Bills. This is going to be a great matchup. Perhaps the only one where you say for the rest of the season the Chiefs aren't going to be favored in, and potentially the game where they do end up falling short in their quest to go 17-0. But, since Buffalo are 2.5-point favorites, shockingly, I do have to pick the Chiefs not to win outright, but against the spread here. Because I think Buffalo has the talent to win the game. They had the strategy to win the game. And most importantly, they have the record to prove it. They like I said, 3-0 against the Chiefs in the regular season. I think, the Chiefs are a good enough team to keep it close, but the mirage surrounding them, the fact that they've been a little bit lucky, the fact they played in 7 one-score games, the fact that, they keep on finding ways to win, toe being out of bounds, a blocked field goal, comes to tell me that eventually doomsday is coming for them, and it could be against a team that's had their number and they are familiar with this season. And so that's why I'm a little bit anxious to pick the Chiefs outright, and I'm going to change it to against the spread pick. But I feel like this game is still going to be too close to call. Even though the Bills certainly have the talent to make this a blowout. Because on the other side of things, the Chiefs defense is talented, but they're compensating for a lot. And so eventually, they're going to get overwhelmed in one of these games here, and the Bills look the most apt to do it. So, as close as I think this game is going to be, I would give the Bills the win, but the Chiefs the respect they deserve in covering this low spread here. And so, it's kind of weird and cliche to pick against the Chiefs, but it's got to happen sometime, and the Bills are just sitting there 3-0 against them already in the regular season in the Mahomes era, waiting for 4-0 to come for them and to ruin the Chiefs' chances of going undefeated, ironically. The last game I want to quickly touch on before we go to break, Texans-Cowboys, not necessarily the most attractive of games anymore. Houston 7-point favorites as a result. I'm going to pick them in this game, but it could be one of those games where the Cowboys put together a couple interesting drives to make you say this team can be relaxed for the rest of the season, and going into next year, Dak coming back can actually sustain him, make him feel like he's not going to have to be the superhero week in, week out. And so this game, I feel, yes, the Cowboys aren't going to win, but they're going to show us that they still have some heart to them in this one, and prove that next season could be a turning of the new leaf for all of these players. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, because our final segment, we're going to transition from all of these interesting games and focus on one game in particular, Sunday Night Football. Perhaps one of the more bizarre games this week to close out that Sunday slate. Bengals-Chargers. I'm going to have all things betting when we come back after the break for that game. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and we're going to jump ahead and preview the last game of the Sunday slate. A bizarre Sunday night game in the AFC. The Bengals taking on the LA Chargers at SoFi Stadium. And this one really is one that I can't quite wrap my head around, because it feels like both of these teams have a point to prove, but the Bengals have already proven half of it, right? We know what this offense is capable of. This offense could hang 50 on anyone if we're being honest. That's how they're clicking right now. Joe Burrow, like I said previously, MVP caliber play. His rapport with Chase, Higgins, the entire offense for that matter, is the best it's been in his entire career. And I feel like, with all the struggles the defense has been facing, this offense is undeterred by any deficit, whether or not they are out to a big lead, because they feel they can continue to put up points for as long as you ask them to. But the reason why people might be a little bit more optimistic, and why Vegas certainly is optimistic about this Chargers team, and that's why they are apparently 2-point favorites here. The over-under is favoring them and their defense, 46.5, and they're minus 125 to win outright, is, like I said, because of that defense, the number 3 scoring defense in the entire league. However, I just want to go over the Chargers schedule here, because a lot of people, I feel like, might be a little bit in over their heads in terms of where they rank the Chargers. They are a 6-4 football team, and kudos to Jim Harbaugh for creating a certain culture there that become more physical, more smash-mouth football than we're used to from LA. But I just want to go over the teams they played and the schedule they faced thus far. Their best win this season, as I pull up their schedule, might be against the Broncos. And as much as I respect the Broncos, I feel like that's not telling me what this Chargers team really is. If your best win is against a Broncos team that's probably not going to make the playoffs as hard as they play all season long, then I feel like, against a Bengals offense that can tear you to shreds any given Sunday, you're not going to look that good. And so this game just feels bizarre in how people are shaping it up to be. This kind of defensive slugfest where the Chargers drag the Bengals into their style of play. Or, where Joe Burrow suddenly magically turns into a Daniel Jones-esque quarterback and throws 3 to 5 interceptions. That's not how this game is going to look. I feel like all these kind of offense versus defensive games have a defining moment, and sometimes, the defense most likely wins out. Because, as the saying goes, defense wins championships. But I just feel like the Chargers defense is a mirage. They have the talent. They have the players. They have the number 3 scoring defense in the league to prove it. But who have they played that proves that they are a team to be reckoned with? And not for nothing, I haven't even talked about their offense, right? Because you can drag teams into their game, right? And we've seen that in all their wins. But when you're playing teams like the Panthers, the Broncos, the Browns, the Saints, the Titans, these are all teams who do not excel against the run and also can't keep up with you if you do happen to put points on the board. Whereas the Bengals, yes, we know that the Chargers can potentially put up points, but their offense is just going to score more than you. And I feel like the Chargers haven't been in a game like that where they can be like, okay, let's just try and score as many points as possible, get in the 27 to 30 point range, and we'll be as good as gold because our defense can close it out. That's not how it's going to happen, because the Bengals offense, no matter how many points you score, whether you score 20, they're going to score 25. Whether you score 26, 27, they're going to score 35. So this is a Bengals offense that is more than capable of, bolstering their defense through their consistent play. And for what it's worth, this Bengals defense, at least on paper, isn't as terrible as we think it is. They have the players to really affect opposing offenses. It's just that I feel like, for whatever reason, their philosophies and identities don't equate to on-field success. And it is kind of problematic that we're at this point in the season, they haven't figured it out yet. And if they had, they would potentially have a winning record. But it's not necessarily like it's been to the complete detriment of this team because of what this offense is doing. Whereas the Chargers, I feel like, are too reliant on their defense shutting teams down that their offense kind of gets overshadowed. And I do like, a lot of the players on this offense. Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey are reliable receivers when Justin Herbert passes them the football. But when I look at the overall outlook for this game, you're going to have to A, slow down the Bengals offense, and B, make sure your own offense can move the football effectively. And chances are, because you're a run-first unit, the Bengals can hone into that. Yes, their run defense has been atrocious all season, but they know what to expect out of you. They know that you're not going to try to hurt them in the football field, unless, of course, they're ahead. So, if the Bengals get out to an early lead like I think they will, this will not go well for the Chargers if they're just trying to play catch-up. Because as much as, Jim Harbaugh always feels like he's going to win a football game, you have to make sure that you're the team that's ahead. And the Chargers, for as methodical and efficiency-driven they are, can't necessarily keep up with an offense that, could do so much with so little in such a little amount of time. So, if you get what I'm saying, I feel like the Chargers can frustrate the Bengals by keeping Joe Burrow on the sidelines. But if Joe Burrow is going to have very efficiently short drives and put up points on the board as a result, then what's the point of, these methodical 10-11 play drives if you know that you're just going to play catch-up? So, it's going to force the Chargers' hand here on the offense side of the football. Do you give Justin Herbert the keys to the car in this game and say, pass us to victory if you can? Or do you want to play that keep Joe Burrow on the sidelines game and risk, Joe Burrow, when he does get the football, just throwing 50 to 75-yard bombs to Jamar Chase all the time? Because that's to be expected here. Let's not get it twisted. As much as I want to believe in the Chargers' defense, that's what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase do, no matter who they play. And if you want to throw out there that perhaps the Bengals haven't played the best of schedules, then consider the fact that, they have some questionable losses. But they also have not, in their losses, been that lucky as other teams have been. They had that 1-point loss to the Chiefs. They could have won, that unfortunate fumble by Joe Burrow in that game. They had that overtime game against the Ravens before last week's game against them where they went for 2 and potentially ruined their season. But they've played competitive games against playoff caliber teams and proven that they're there and thereabouts. And this offense is more than capable of keeping them in games. It's just that, you have to hope that their defense is bad enough that you score more points in them. Kind of like what the Commanders did, right? Where the Commanders kind of stayed ahead of schedule, was actually leading for quite some time in that game, and ultimately finished it out. And then the Ravens in both their games just played them mano a mano and matched them touchdown for touchdown. So when you look at it that way, and you look at the Chargers offense, I don't see a reasonable way to justify how they can find a game plan where they're not constantly playing from behind. And it's going to say a lot about, Jim Harbaugh style of football if the Chargers do get blown out. But I also feel like you can't necessarily get discouraged if you're the Chargers. Because let me look at their schedule yet again. Because I think it does toughen up a little bit. But it is a very frustrating brand of football for opponents to play. They do play the Ravens next. They play the Falcons, Chiefs, and Bucs, all tough games. But these are all games that you can stay in. It's just that this one, I kind of feel like from the way the Bengals are playing, you can't ignore the fact that Joe Burrow and that offense will just put up points in bunches. So that's why I have to take this Bengals squad on the road giving 2 points to the Chargers. And it's stunning to say that the Chargers are favored in this game, but I can see why it's just not justified for me. So I'm picking the Bengals in this one, and we'll talk a little bit more about this game tomorrow. That will just about do it for today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network. Continue doing what you're doing to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, Shepard is out. See you tomorrow.